The woman arrived the way trouble always does in the high desert, without warning and carrying everything she owned. Nora Calloway stepped off the eastbound stage at the edge of Harlan, Texas, just as the afternoon sun was doing its level best to kill everything beneath it. The sky was the color of scorched bone, white and merciless and vast. The two children beside her, a girl of 9 and a boy of perhaps 6, stood close against her skirts. Not from tenderness alone but from the ancient animal instinct of creatures who had learned that the world was not safe and that whatever warmth existed in it, you kept near. She had one trunk. One. Bound with rope where the latch had broken, and the rope itself was frayed down to the last few useful threads. Cole Hargrove saw her from across the street. He was standing outside Delaney's Feed and Hardware, one boot propped against the hitching rail, hat pulled low against the glare. Doing nothing in particular, which was how men who carried too many memories often spent their time. He watched her try to lift that trunk from the stage platform. He watched the trunk win. He crossed the street without deciding to. "Let me get that," he said. She looked at him the way women who'd been left to manage alone too long look at offered help, with suspicion wearing the face of gratitude. "I can manage," she said. "I can see that," he said, and picked up the trunk anyway. If this story already has you feeling something, hit that subscribe button right now and ring that bell so you never miss what comes next. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, settle in, because this one is going to stay with you. Cole Hargrove was not a complicated man, but he was a private one. The ranch he worked, the Double H, which had belonged to his father and his father's father before they both died of stubbornness and hard winters, sat 11 miles southwest of Harlan on a flat stretch of land that the creek had long ago abandoned. The house had 4 rooms and a porch that leaned slightly westward, like a man who'd taken too many hits from the same direction. He had not planned for guests. He had not planned for much of anything. What had happened was this: Nora Calloway, in the 30 minutes between stepping off the stage and Cole loading her trunk into his wagon, had explained, in the flat, economical language of someone reciting facts rather than telling a story, that her husband was dead, that the man her husband had owed money to was not, and that the town of Galloway, 60 miles east, had become a place she could no longer safely remain. Cole had listened. Then he'd said, "I've got 4 rooms." And she had looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time, and something in the steadiness of his face, in the way his eyes didn't shift or calculate, made her say, "All right." They did not speak much on the drive out. The children, Lily, the girl, and Samuel, who everyone called Sam, sat in the wagon bed with the trunk and watched the desert go by. Sam asked once if there were snakes. Cole said there were. Sam seemed to find this acceptable. The ranch looked worse arriving than Cole had remembered it looking when he'd left that morning. He'd grown accustomed to the neglect the way you grow accustomed to a bad tooth. You stop noticing until someone else sees it. The curtains in the front window were grey with dust. The porch step nearest the door had rotted through and been replaced with a flat stone that wobbled. 3 seasons' worth of dead tumbleweed had pressed themselves against the south side of the house like they were trying to get in out of the wind. Nora stood at the edge of the porch and looked at all of it without a word. "It needs some work," Cole said. "Most things do," she said, and walked inside. The kitchen was the worst room. Cole knew this. There were tin plates stacked unevenly near the wash basin, crusted with the evidence of meals cooked carelessly and cleaned up even more so. A skillet sat on the cold iron stove with a crust of blackened grease that had hardened over the course of days. The flour sack was nearly empty and had been left open, and something small had gotten into it. The window above the basin had a crack running diagonal from corner to corner, sealed imperfectly with a strip of dried rawhide. Nora set her traveling bag on the table, looked around the kitchen once the way a general looks at a map, and rolled up her sleeves. "Is there a cellar?" she asked. "Just outside the back door." "Salt pork?" "Half a side." "Cornmeal?" "Full sack." She nodded once, as though a decision had been ratified, and went to work. Cole stood in the doorway watching her for a moment that stretched longer than was comfortable, then went to see to the horses and give her the room she clearly needed. What she produced that evening out of that neglected kitchen was something Cole would carry the memory of for a long time afterward. She had found dried beans soaking in a crock he'd forgotten about. She had rendered the fat from the salt pork in the clean skillet. She had cleaned that skillet with creek sand and sheer will, and had fried up cornbread in the drippings. The kind that formed a dark crust on the bottom like a seal of approval. The beans had simmered with an onion she'd produced from somewhere inside her traveling bag, along with what appeared to be a small paper packet of cumin, and the smell coming out of that kitchen. When Cole stepped back inside from washing his hands at the pump, stopped him completely in the doorway. It smelled like something that had been missing so long he'd stopped knowing it was gone. Lily had set the table. She'd done it with great seriousness, the way children perform tasks they're desperate to be useful at. Aligning the tin plates with careful precision and folding 2 rags into approximate rectangles for napkins. Sam had been given the job of filling the water glasses from the pitcher, which he had done with the focused intensity of a man diffusing an explosive. They sat at the table. All 4 of them. Cole wasn't certain how that had happened precisely. He'd sat down, and then the children had sat down, and then Nora had brought the pot from the stove and set it in the center and sat down herself. And it had felt so ordinary and so entirely foreign at once that Cole experienced a strange doubling, like looking at a room you've known all your life with different furniture in it. He said, "This is good." Nora said, "You had good ingredients." Cole looked at the near-empty flour sack, the half-side of salt pork, the forgotten crock of beans. "Debatable," he said. The corner of her mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the cartography of one. Sam asked if they could have the cornbread before or after the beans. Nora said after. Sam negotiated. Nora held firm. Sam ate his beans with a martyred expression. Lily told him he was being dramatic. Cole said nothing, but he ate 2 portions of everything, and when he got up to clear the plates, he also, without announcement, put the last 2 pieces of cornbread on Sam's plate. Because the boy had eaten his beans without further protest and that seemed deserving of recognition. That night, after the children were settled in the second room on the folding cots that Cole had dragged down from the attic and Nora had made up with sheets she'd washed and hung to dry off the porch rail by lamplight, Cole sat on the leaning porch with his coffee and listened to the desert come alive the way it did after dark, the insects, the far-off cry of something he'd stopped trying to identify years ago. The wind moving across the flats without apology. He didn't know what he had agreed to, precisely. He was beginning to think it might matter. The first week passed the way first weeks on a working ranch always do, in the relentless currency of labor. There were fence posts that needed resetting along the north pasture, a section of roof flashing that had peeled back in the last windstorm and needed hammering down before the monsoons arrived. And 2 of the cattle had gotten through a gap in the lower pasture and needed finding. Nora worked alongside him without being asked to. This was the thing that surprised Cole most, not that she helped, but that she offered no performance of helping. She did not work to be noticed or to demonstrate capability. She simply worked, the way water moves, along whatever channel existed, without drama, without pause. She mended the curtains. She replaced the broken step with a proper board she'd found in the lean-to behind the barn, and she'd set it square and nailed it level, which was better than Cole had done with the stone. She cleaned the cracked window and resealed it with proper window putty she'd sent Lily to fetch from the back of Cole's supplies shelf. She'd found it there before Cole even remembered he had it. Lily, for her part, had appointed herself the keeper of the kitchen garden, which was a grand title for a patch of dirt beside the south wall where someone, Cole's mother, before she'd gone, had once grown things. Lily had found the ghost of old furrows beneath the crusted soil and decided they meant something. She dug in them with a stick and a tin cup and asked Cole if he had seeds. He had a paper envelope of radishes and a questionable quantity of dried beans. He gave them to her without ceremony. She accepted them like property titles. Sam shadowed Cole. It began the second morning, when Cole went to the barn before dawn. He'd heard the boy behind him, the particular small sound of small boots in loose dirt, and had not turned around, had simply opened the barn door wider than he needed to and gone about his work. And Sam had come in behind him and stood watching. Cole handed him a currycomb. Sam took it. Cole showed him, with one pass of his own hand down the gelding's flank, what was wanted. Sam did it. Cole nodded once. Sam glowed like a lantern someone had just lit. This became the morning ritual. Coffee inside. Barn outside. The systematic work of two people, one of whom was 6 3/4 and absolutely certain of his own competence. Cole did not make the mistake of false praise. He corrected without harshness when the boy did something wrong, held the comb at the wrong angle, stood too close to the hind legs, and said plainly when it was done right. Sam responded to this like water to a dry field. He had been, Cole suspected, a boy who'd been managed rather than taught. The difference mattered. 40 miles east of the Double H, in the dying cow town of Galloway, a man named Declan Marsh was drinking at the bar of the Sundowner Hotel when the stage rider came in with news. Marsh was not a large man. He was the kind of man who had learned early that physical size was a disadvantage in his particular profession, because large men got watched. Marsh was slim and wore good boots and kept his voice quiet and his expressions pleasant, and these were tools the same way a rifle was a tool, chosen for specific work. He was 39 years old. He had grey eyes the colour of creek water in drought. He was owed, by his own accounting, $1,140 by the estate of one James Calloway, deceased, and he considered debts owed to him a matter of personal principle. The stage rider, accepting a drink at Marsh's elbow, mentioned offhandedly that a woman with 2 children had ridden out of Harlan with the Hargrove man. Cole Hargrove. Big spread west of town. Marsh sipped his drink. He asked, pleasantly, if the rider knew anything about Hargrove. The rider knew some things. Plenty of land, enough cattle to matter, more money than he spent. Not a man who looked for trouble. That's the interesting kind, Marsh said, mostly to himself, and laid 2 coins on the bar for the rider's drink. He did not leave Galloway that night. He was a patient man. He would finish what he was doing in Galloway first, there were 2 other matters to settle, and then he would ride west, and he would be pleasant about all of it. He always was. In the evenings at the Double H, when the work was done and the supper cleared and the children had been sent to bed, Cole and Nora sat on the porch, him with coffee. Her with the mending she seemed to produce in an endless supply, and they talked. They talked the way people talk when they are feeling their way toward trust in the dark, carefully, testing each word before letting the weight of it fall. She told him about James. Not the full shape of the man but the edges, that he'd been funny before he'd been broken, that he'd loved his children in the distracted way of men who love large and plan poorly. That the debts had come the way debts always do, not all at once but by degrees, each one reasonable seeming in isolation. Cole told her about the ranch. About his father. He did not tell her about the wife he'd had for 2 years before the fever took her. But he told her about the loneliness in the language men use when they're talking about something else, in the form of the rotted step, the cracked window, the forgotten crock of beans. She heard what he meant. He could tell. She heard it and she let it sit there without fixing it or flinching from it, and that alone was worth more to him than he had words for. The necessity of provisions drove them into Harlan on a Thursday, which was the day the supply wagon from San Angelo came through and filled the shelves at Delaney's. Cole brought the wagon. Nora and Lily came. Sam stayed back at the ranch with strict instructions to leave the horses alone and general authority over the chickens, which he accepted as high office. Harlan was not a cruel town, but it was a small one, and small towns run on the fuel of other people's arrangements. They had not been down the main street 30 seconds before Cole noticed it, the way people noticed them. The way eyes moved and then looked away. The way 2 women in front of the dry goods store shifted their conversation inward without stopping it. He had lived in this town all his life and he knew its rhythms the way you know the rhythms of your own blood, and the rhythm today was of a story already being told. Nora noticed too. She gave no outward sign of it beyond a slight straightening of her shoulders, that almost imperceptible adjustment people make when they are preparing to bear weight. Delaney's was the worst of it. Theodore Delaney himself, a man of 60-something with the build of a man who'd once been strong and the opinions of a man who'd never stopped being so, was behind the counter when they came in. He was polite to Cole with the careful politeness of a man withholding something, and he was polite to Nora with the polite politeness of a man who was making a point of being polite. Which is an entirely different and considerably less pleasant thing. It was Marge Colton who said it plainly. Marge Colton ran the Harlan Ladies Auxiliary and considered this position equivalent to a judicial appointment. She appeared from behind the bolt fabric display like a woman who had been waiting there for some time. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, warm as a court summons. "I was hoping to run into you. We'd heard you had guests out at the Double H residence," Cole said. Marge Colton smiled the smile of someone filing that word away for later examination. "Of course. I only ask because, well, there are those of us who take an interest in the moral character of this community. A widowed woman, living alone with a bachelor gentleman, she's not alone," Cole said. "Her children are there." "Be that as it may, Mrs. Colton." Cole's voice hadn't risen. It hadn't needed to. It had simply settled, the way a stone settles when you've put it where it belongs. "I appreciate the community's concern for the moral character of my property." The word property fell in the space between them like a door closing. Marge Colton's smile held, but only just. Nora, to her extraordinary credit, was examining a bolt of blue calico during this entire exchange with the focused attention of a woman whose entire inner life was completely contained and none of anyone's business. It was Lily who was the unexpected grace note of the morning. She had drifted to the jars of hard candy near the front window with the practiced casualness of a child who has learned to want things quietly. Cole saw her looking, and he bought her lemon drops, a full paper twist of them, without explanation. When he handed them to her, she looked up at him with an expression so naked in its gratitude that he had to look away. Outside, loading the wagon, Nora said, "You didn't have to hold your ground like that." "Wasn't holding ground," Cole said, shifting a sack of flour. "Just standing where I was standing." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, they're going to say we're married." "Let them," he said. "Cole." Her voice had something careful in it, something edged with exhaustion and something else he couldn't name yet. "That's not nothing. That matters. That follows a person." He set the last sack in the wagon and turned to look at her. The sun was directly behind her, and she was outlined in it, the brim of her hat, the line of her jaw, the straight and particular way she held herself. "Pretend to be my wife," he said. It came out plain, the way true things do when you've stopped overthinking them. Just until things are settled. Just so there's no more Marge Colton. Just so you and those kids have something solid underneath them. She stared at him. "That's a considerable ask," she said. "I know it." She looked down the street, at Delaney's, at the Ladies' Auxiliary sign visible in the mercantile window. At the world that was already constructing its opinion of her whether she participated or not. "All right," she said. "Pretend." He helped her up into the wagon seat. His hand at her elbow, her hand briefly, incidentally, on his forearm. The contact lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Neither of them said anything about it. But something had shifted in the air between them the way air shifts just before weather. Lily, in the wagon bed, was methodically working through her lemon drops with the solemn satisfaction of a child who has, for the moment, received exactly what she needed. Cole clicked the horses forward. That evening, back at the ranch, Nora was quiet through supper in the particular way of someone working something over. After the children were abed, she came out to the porch and stood at the rail rather than sitting, looking out at the dark flat of the desert, which at night became absolute, no edge, no shape. Only the stars above it like a cold agreement about the infinite. In Galloway, she said, without preamble, Marsh had papers. Legal papers. He said James had used me as surety on one of the loans. Cole set his coffee cup down. A man can't use a person as collateral, he said. Marsh's lawyer would disagree. She turned and looked at him. I don't know what the papers actually say. I couldn't read all of it before I left. I left fast. She paused. We left fast. Cole was quiet for a moment. A screech owl somewhere off to the east said its piece and went silent. When did you leave? 8 days ago. Cole looked out at the dark. 8 days. 8 days plus a day's hard ride, if a man knew where he was going. Maybe less, if a man had a good horse and a reason. I'll send a wire to the county clerk's office in Galloway tomorrow, he said. Find out what those papers actually say. And if they say what Marsh claims. Then we'll find out what they don't say, Cole said. Legal paper is one thing. Law is another. They're not always the same animal. Nora turned back to the dark. You're a better man than I expected, she said. There was no flattery in it. It was simply an observation, precise and a little sad, the way observations are sad when they reveal what you've been taught to expect from the world. Go to bed, he said quietly. We'll figure it in the morning. She went inside. Cole sat on the porch another hour in the dark, with his cold coffee and the owl and the infinite desert. And thought about paper and law and the distance between a man with good boots and pleasant manners, and a woman who'd left everything in 8 days. Declan Marsh arrived in Harlan on a Tuesday, which was not market day and not particularly notable in any way, which suited him precisely. He took a room at the Harlan Inn, which had 6 rooms and a dining area, and he ate a pleasant supper and spoke pleasantly to the woman who served it. And by the time he'd finished his second cup of coffee, he had learned, through entirely pleasant conversation, that Cole Hargrove's ranch lay 11 miles southwest. That Hargrove was a respected man in the county, and that there was a woman and 2 children living out there that some people in town had strong feelings about. He thanked his server and went to his room and slept soundly, the way men sleep when they have separated the question of their actions from the question of their conscience. He did not ride to the Double H the next day. He sent a man instead. Cole woke at 3 in the morning because the dog barked once and then went silent, which was worse than if it had kept barking. He was out of bed and had his boots on and his rifle in hand before the thought was fully formed. The ranch was dark and quiet and the moon was a thin silver scratch across the sky, providing just enough light to make shadows out of shapes and shapes out of nothing. He moved through the house to the kitchen and stood to one side of the window, looking out at the yard. The barn door was open 2 inches more than he'd left it. He went out the back, moving along the south wall of the house, staying low, staying in the shadow of the wall. The desert air at this hour had a cold that felt personal. The wind had died. Every sound was an event, his own breath, the brush of his boot through dry grass, somewhere to the north the very distant complaint of one of the cattle. He came around the corner of the barn slowly. There was a man inside. He could hear him, not much, but enough. The particular sound of someone trying to be very quiet while doing something in a space they don't know in the dark. Moving among the horses. The horses were restless in the specific way horses get when there's a stranger, not panicked, not yet, but prepared. Cole stepped into the barn doorway and said, "Step out where I can see you." There was a silence of perhaps 4 seconds. Then the man came out from behind the last stall, young, 20 or so, wearing trail dust and an expression of elaborate casualness that he hadn't had enough time to fully construct. "Just looking for my horse," the young man said. "Must have wandered." "None of these are yours," Cole said. "Easy mistake in the dark." "What's your name?" The young man smiled. It was someone else's smile, borrowed from someone older and more practiced. "I'm just passing through." "No harm meant." "I'll be on my way." "You'll be on your way when I know who sent you," Cole said. The rifle was not raised. It didn't need to be. The weight of it in his hands was its own conversation. The young man looked at the rifle and the conversation recalculated behind his eyes. "Fella named Marsh," he said. "He just wanted me to have a look around. See what's what." "And what is what?" Woman and 2 kids. That's what he wanted to know. If they were really here. He paused. They are. Cole looked at him for a long moment. The young man was scared. He was doing a scared man's very best impression of someone who wasn't, and doing it poorly. And Cole felt something that was not quite sympathy and not quite contempt but lived in the territory between them. You go back to Harlan, Cole said. You go back to Harlan and you tell Marsh that this property and everyone on it is under my protection. Those are my words. Use them. He won't like that. I expect not. The young man left on his own horse, which had been tied to the fence post behind the barn. Which meant the story about the wandering horse had been exactly what it sounded like. Cole watched until he was a shape in the dark and then nothing at all. Then he stood in the open barn doorway for a while longer, breathing, listening to the desert settle back into itself. He heard the soft sound of footsteps behind him and knew them before he turned. Nora stood at the edge of the barn in her nightclothes with a shotgun, his spare shotgun from the kitchen rack, held at her side with the practiced ease of someone who had held one before. I heard the dog, she said. So did I. She looked out at the dark where the rider had gone. Marsh. He sent somebody to confirm you were here. She nodded slowly. Her jaw was set in the particular way of someone who is terrified and has decided that fear is not currently relevant information. Then he's coming, she said. Yes. She looked at him. In the thin moonlight, her face was very clear. I'm sorry. I brought this here. To you and this place. You brought cornbread and a level porch step, Cole said. And 2 children who sleep safe tonight. That's what you brought. Her breath came out slowly. Some held thing in her loosened, fractionally. Go back inside, he said. I'll sit watch till morning. I'll sit watch with you, she said, and that was the end of that discussion. They sat on the porch together in the cold dark, the rifle across his knees, the shotgun across hers, and the stars overhead doing what stars do, burning without warmth, beautiful and indifferent. And permanent in the way only indifferent things are. Somewhere in that long quiet watch, she fell asleep against his shoulder. He did not move. He sat still, breathing carefully, and he thought about how long the house had been empty of warmth and how he hadn't understood the difference until the warmth was there again. The dawn came the color of hammered brass across the flat rim of the desert. He had decided everything by then, and the deciding had been quiet and certain, the way the best decisions are not arrived at but recognized. Like something that had been true all along waiting only to be named. Cole rode into Harlan at first light and went directly to the office of Emmett Gage, who was the county attorney, a thin man of methodical temperament and the best legal mind within 4 counties. And who kept office hours that began at 7 a.m. Because he believed firmly in the moral value of early industry. Gage was at his desk when Cole knocked and entered. He looked at Cole's face and poured him a cup of coffee without being asked. Cole told him about the papers, about Marsh, about the wire to the Galloway clerk's office. Gage listened with the focused stillness of his kind, men who make their living hearing what people say and, more importantly, what they don't. A man cannot hold a person as surety for a debt, Gage said, when Cole had finished. That is not law. That hasn't been law. What Marsh may have are papers that create the appearance of legal obligation where none exists. It's a tactic. Effective with people who have no access to counsel. What are our options? Cole said. Gage looked at him steadily over the rim of his coffee cup. Our options are several. First, I file a challenge to the validity of those instruments with the district court, which takes time. Time Marsh may use productively. He already sent a man to the property. Then time is our limiting factor. Gage set the cup down. The stronger and faster legal instrument available to you, Cole, is marriage. Cole said nothing. A wife holds legal standing independent of her husband's debts, Gage continued. A wife on title to a property has protections a boarder does not. If Mrs. Calloway were to be Mrs. Hargrove, legally, properly, Marsh's papers, whatever they actually say, become substantially more difficult to act upon. She is no longer a woman alone. She is a property owner's spouse, on deeded land, in a county with a sheriff who respects property law. Cole turned his hat in his hands. He'd been turning it since he sat down. He made himself stop. "That's not a small thing," he said. "To ask of a person." "No," Gage agreed. "It isn't. But it may be the only wall that holds long enough for us to dismantle the rest of his claim through proper channels. Which I will do. Given 60 to 90 days. Cole was quiet for a moment. "Draw the papers," he said. "I'll talk to her." Nora was in the kitchen garden with Lily when Cole came back. She looked up at the sound of the wagon, and she read something in his face before he'd said a word, the way she had developed a capacity to read him that still surprised him with its accuracy. He asked Lily to check on Sam. Lily went, with the reluctant compliance of a child who suspects she is being excluded from something important. Cole told Nora what Gage had said. He told it straight, without dressing it in anything, giving her the same plainness he gave everything. She listened with her hands folded in her lap, sitting on the upturned crate she used as a garden seat, the desert sun coming down on the brim of her worn hat. A smear of dark earth across her left wrist. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Last time someone married me," she said slowly, "I was 19 years old and I thought love was simple." "I'm not asking for simple," Cole said. "I'm asking for real." She looked up at him. "When I said pretend," he said, "I meant it." Then. He paused. "I don't mean it now. I haven't meant it for some time. But I want you to know that you have a choice, Nora. This is an offer and not a requirement. If you want only the legal protection and nothing besides, I'll honor that. You and your children will have this land and this house and a name that keeps Marsh away from you. And if that's all it ever is, it'll be enough." The garden smelled of disturbed earth and something faintly green, the first inch of radish tops coming through Lily's careful furrows. Pale and determined against the odds. Nora stood up from the crate. She was close, close enough that the shadow of his hat brim touched her. She put one hand flat against his chest, over the worn fabric of his shirt, and felt the weight and steadiness of what was underneath it. Then she kissed him. Not tentatively. Not like a question. Like an answer that had been forming for a long time and had finally arrived at the fullness of what it was. When she stepped back, something in her face had changed, all the careful held distance gone, the ground shifted under both of them, the landscape entirely different from any they'd stood in before. "Not pretend," she said. "No," Cole said. "Not pretend." They were married in the office of Emmett Gage 3 days later. With the county attorney as witness and Lily standing in her best dress, which Nora had pressed the evening before with a flat iron heated on the stove, and Sam in a collar he endured with the martyrdom of a soldier taking ground. Cole had bought the dress fabric himself, the blue calico from Delaney's, without announcement. He'd handed it to Nora the evening before without ceremony. She'd held it a moment and looked at him and said nothing, which was everything. Word reached Marsh in Harlan before the ink on the deed transfer was fully dry, because Harlan was a small town and small towns run at the speed of news, and the news was considerable. Cole Hargrove had added Nora Calloway's name to the deed of the Double H and married her legal before the county attorney. And Emmett Gage had filed a formal challenge to the validity of Marsh's debt instruments with the district court, citing evidence of fraudulent construction. Marsh came anyway. He rode out to the Double H on a Friday afternoon and he was, as always, pleasant about it. He sat his horse in the yard and called out. And Cole came to the porch with the rifle and Nora came out beside him and they stood together the way people stand when they are in agreement about what they are standing for. Marsh looked at them. He looked at the newly nailed porch board, the clean windows, the smoke coming from the kitchen chimney. The girl visible at the corner of the garden and the boy, 6 3/4 and certain of his own importance, standing slightly in front of the adults in the unconscious way of children who have decided they belong somewhere. "I have legal papers," Marsh said. I have legal papers too, Cole said. Mine are more recent. Emmett Gage's name is on them. I expect you know Emmett Gage. Marsh did know Emmett Gage. The pleasantness around his eyes shifted. Not gone, he was too practiced for it to leave entirely, but thinned. This isn't finished, Marsh said. I expect it'll finish in court, Cole said. 60 days, more or less. Gage is good. Marsh looked at Nora. She met his gaze with the level, unbroken patience of someone who has already decided he cannot hurt her anymore, and this was perhaps the most powerful thing he encountered that afternoon. He left. He left, and 2 weeks later he settled with Galloway's district court for a reduced amount, a fraction of his original claim. And no portion of it against Nora or the children, because Gage had indeed found the fraudulent construction in the original instruments and was, as he had said he would be, quite good. The town of Harlan's opinion, for what it was worth, resolved itself with the organic logic of small communities, which is to say it went where the strongest current ran. Cole Hargrove was the strongest current in this particular county. And the story of the man who'd taken in a widow and her children and stood on his porch with a rifle against a man who'd preyed on grief, well, that story had a certain undeniable quality to it. Even Marge Colton came to the ladies' auxiliary meeting the following month and spoke about Mrs. Hargrove's garden with the warm approval of someone who had been on the right side of this all along. Lily's radishes came in 4 weeks after planting, small and sharp and triumphant. She put them on the supper table without being asked, cut into wedges, with a small dish of salt beside them. And she sat down and looked at the table with the complete satisfaction of someone who has made something from nothing and knows the value of that. Sam ate for radish wedges without complaint, which Lily correctly understood as the highest possible form of tribute. Cole ate 2 portions of everything, as had become his habit. Nora poured his coffee the way she had learned he took it, strong, no sweetening, and set it at his elbow and sat down across from him. And the 4 of them were quiet together in the easy way of people who have stopped needing words for everything because the silence has become safe. The desert is not a forgiving place. It doesn't pretend to be. It offers nothing that is not earned, not water, not shade, not the particular hard mercy of ground that holds when you plant something in it. What it offers, when you have earned it, stays. There is a house 11 miles southwest of Harlan that leans slightly westward on its porch. Though the step is level now and the windows are clear and there is a kitchen garden along the south wall where things grow in the measured rows of someone who believes in the effort. In the evenings, there is smoke from the chimney and lamplight in the windows and, if the wind is low, the sound of a woman's voice and children's voices and a man's low response that carries. Somehow, the particular weight of someone who has stopped moving through rooms like a ghost in his own house. What was broken can hold again, and the holding is its own kind of beauty, not the beauty of the thing before it broke, but the beauty of what endures past breaking. The places where things were mended are visible. They are not hidden. They are the record of surviving, and they are nothing to be ashamed of. A woman who left everything in 8 days. A man who forgot he had a crock of beans. 2 children who knew, from the very first evening, that a man who gives his last 2 pieces of cornbread without being asked is a man who will give more than that when it matters. The desert takes, as deserts do. But the right house on the right piece of ground with the right people in it, that keeps. That keeps through the hard winters and the dry years and the men with pleasant manners and borrowed smiles, and it keeps past all of them. It keeps.